Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Refold podcast. My name is Clayton, also known as George Pig, and I manage the community here at Refold. Today, we're joined by full-time engineering student and part-time language tutor, teacher Hannah. She teaches Tagalog part-time on websites such as Tagalog.com and italki. Okay, so teacher Hannah, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Very clear.
Okay. So thank you for coming on. We've been trying for a couple of weeks now to actually schedule a time that worked for both of us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So, do you want to introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? What is your background with languages?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Hannah Castro, and also known as Teacher Hannah on Tagalog.com and italki. I am born and raised in the Philippines. I am an engineering student, and in my free time, I help people learn my native language, Filipino. And I've had over 1,000 classes and have helped hundreds of students get started in learning the language or improving their Tagalog. So throughout my career, I've probably met all types of students, like just like you're married to a Filipino. So I think that's my number one type of students. And I've also had students who are 100% Filipino, but they have moved abroad or their parents did, so they didn't really get the chance to learn the language and they want to reconnect to the culture. So yeah, every or all kinds of students I've probably met with. And regarding my background
Oh,
with
right.
languages,
So,
so
one sec here.
uh-huh,
I
okay.
think your internet cut out in the middle of that.
Oh,
Yeah, it got
oh,
really slow.
really? That's unusual. Okay,
Okay.
do you want me to?
Yeah, let's try again. And actually, if we need to, we can actually turn off the video and we can just you can send me like a headshot and we can put it in later in like post
Oh, okay.
production. So,
Okay.
okay. So, one, two, three. All right. And teacher Hannah, thank you for coming on. It has been a couple of weeks of trying to meet you. So I'm glad that we were able to find a time that worked for both of us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. To introduce myself, my name is Hannah Castro, also known as Teacher Hannah on Tagalog.com and italki. I'm born and raised in the Philippines. I'm an engineering student, and in my free time, I help people learn my native language, Filipino. I've had over 1,000 classes and had helped hundreds of students get started in learning or improving their Tagalog. Throughout my career, I've probably met with all types of students. Just like you, I have students who are married to Filipinos or kids who are 100% or half Filipino but never got the chance to learn the language and now they want to reconnect. So everything in it, I probably had a student just like them. And regarding my background with languages, as I've said, I'm still in college, and people assume that I'm studying something related to linguistics, but I'm actually in engineering. As a kid, I've always liked English and English literature. I grew up in a place where I was exposed to English speakers, so I had this chance to be with lots of native English speakers. And people from all over the world are coming in and out. So my first job was kind of like a translator for them during the summer, during my summer vacation. So I'm also pretty fluent in English, so sometimes they would ask me to teach phrases to them in Tagalog. And when the pandemic started, I needed to have like an extra income, so I thought it would be a good idea to teach English since I'm very interested in it. I discovered that I have this gift for teaching, and then I found about Tagalog.com which is a platform where you can learn Tagalog, of course. So you can um, have a dictionary or flashcards or any resources to help you with it. So I didn't hesitate to apply as a teacher because I thought that it would be amazing to teach people Tagalog. And since then, I researched all Filipino grammar that I can find that they don't teach at school. I also read a bunch of grammar books and articles to help me to actually know what I'm talking about. And yeah, I think the rest is history. And now I have 3 years of experience in teaching.
All right, interesting. So, you became a teacher because of the pandemic.
Yes.
And have you ever taught English in addition to Filipino? You mentioned that you looked at
Yeah.
teaching English and then you ended up becoming a Tagalog teacher.
Yeah, I actually started as an English teacher for kids and adults. And then when I found out about Tagalog.com, I think it's very interesting. So yeah, I didn't hesitate.
It's always surprising to Filipinos that there are people who do want to learn Tagalog, and some of them take it very seriously. Some of the
Yeah.
learners.
hmm Yes, I'm
So,
actually surprised. Oh,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was surprised that there are people who are actually interested in learning Filipino because it's usually Spanish or Japanese or Chinese. But then I just met these people who are very serious about learning. So that just motivated me more.
And what is it like being a teacher on italki and Tagalog.com?
Oh, it's really great. I'm really grateful for living in the age where you can just teach people in your free time using your own style. So it's really great and fun to meet people who are interested in learning your language and to build bonds over time. So, number one, it's flexible, so I can just set up my own schedule. So even if I have classes, I can just plot my schedule and teach two, three, or even five classes a day, and then during the weekends I can do like full time. It's also global, so I can reach or I have students from all over the world, from some countries that I've never even heard before. So it's really fun.
And when teaching Filipino, what is it like? So, I imagine that when you used to teach English for a bit, um, people tend to have like this base level of English that is okay. Like they might not be great, but there are very few like true beginners, right? Everybody
Yes.
pretty much internationally learns like, "Hello, my name is Bob, and how do you do?" How was that going from English to Filipino, where like a true beginner is much more likely?
hmm yeah, that's a good question. So when I started out as a teacher in Tagalog, it was quite hard for me to find resources because there are not much people who teach Tagalog or who try to learn Tagalog. So the resources are pretty limited. So I tried making my own resources for teaching, but I base it on English or from my English resources from my English lessons. So I started with that and I just built up from that.
Gotcha. But how about the students themselves, right? So, I imagine that, again, with students, they tend to have some level of English, even if it's not the best. Whereas
hmm
with Tagalog learners, you probably have a lot more students who, like, don't know how to say anything.
hmm Yeah, of course. So most of my students actually my students are either zero level beginners or what we call this heritage learners, where they just, like grew up listening to the language so they understand that. So I like to, like really start from the basics. just like what I said, I base it on like English. So I start with the greetings, or I start with teaching them the most basic sentence Tagalog pattern.
Okay. And here at Refold, we don't so much do traditional classes usually. So
Mm-hmm.
our like recommended method for like using a Tagalog.com tutor or an italki tutor would be to use them as like a conversation partner or
Mm-hmm.
to have crosstalk. Um,
Yes.
so how often do you give sort of like instruction in Tagalog? Just have conversation with people and give feedback versus like, teaching.
Okay. So, when I first meet my students, I always ask them, or I always try to set their expectation first. I always ask them, okay, what is your goal in hiring a tutor like me? So, do you want me to explain grammar from the roots? Like, do you want to really learn Tagalog or the structure of Tagalog? Or do you just want to have a language partner? So, if they answer that they want to learn Tagalog from the beginning or from the structure itself and then just build conversation practice, then that is what I will do. So, I'm going to teach them grammar first. And then, if they simply want a conversation partner, I have like tons of activities set up for them so that we can just talk about or simply free talk. Like I would just ask them about how their day went or something like that.
Okay. And have you ever done what we call crosstalk? So that would be where like somebody speaks English to you and then you would speak Filipino back to them.
Yes, I do.
Right. Interesting. So
Oh,
yeah, what when it comes to like teaching, um, what do you see in people who succeed in your successful students? So you said you've had over 1,000 classes. So I'm sure you've seen some people grow from little bitty baby beginners to quite
yeah.
strong speakers. What are some traits that you see in people who succeed?
Mhm. I would say number one would be discipline. Of course, I think that's pretty much given, but I think that it's very important to have discipline, not just motivation. And it's not the ones who are very motivated because at the beginning of or during my first lesson, I always ask them, okay, how motivated are you in learning Tagalog? Then they would say, I'm very, very motivated right now. And then, like a week later, we would just stop. Versus people who would say, like I really want to learn Tagalog, and then yeah, the next week, and then like the next month, I can see their progress. So it's very important to have discipline, not just that urge. And of course, people who are willing to force themselves to speak the language, although they are not good yet. So people would be like there are people who actually know how to speak the words, or they would spend like 5 hours a day or like multiple hours a week studying Tagalog, but they're too afraid to force themselves to talk to people using the language. So I think it's just it doesn't make sense to me. If you want to learn a language, you should force yourself to speak it, not just memorize all the words because it's not really gonna stuck to you over time. And lastly, I think the traits that I do see in my students who succeed are the students who are open to criticism and correction, because of course, like, let's face it, there are students who are quite arrogant, like, oh, I already know like 12 languages, so Tagalog is very easy, or it's not a big deal for me. But then like they would have a hard time. So you should be able to always open to criticism and correction. So I want students to like repeat what I just corrected, not just like go inside the right ear and then go outside the left ear, or what to say in Tagalog. Yeah, I think that's all. Or yeah, that summarizes it.
So you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned arrogant students. You know, I feel like this is probably more common in a language like Tagalog than in other languages, because Filipinos tend to be very supportive,
Oh yeah.
and it can sort of make the learner feel like they're good even when they're
Mhm.
not.
Yes, I think that's one of the factors because Filipinos are very like friendly people. So they or we like to know that like you're not afraid. Like we have tons of phrases for that. We have tons of words for that. Like kind words. So yeah, I think it's true. Just what you just said.
Yeah, it's sort of they get their ego stroked,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that can lead to them being overly confident even when they don't speak perfectly or
Yes,
they make mistakes.
exactly.
Now, you are like an actual native Tagalog speaker, right? Like you
Yes,
grew
I
up
am.
in the Tagalog area,
Oh,
and and a lot of Filipinos aren't, right? So as we know, only about 30% of Filipinos speak Tagalog as their first language. A lot of people speak Bisaya or they speak
mm-hmm.
Ilocano or um, you know Kapampangan or any other language,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So you're like an actual sort of like you grew up in a Tagalog area
Mm-hmm.
and you grew up in Rizal, I think.
Yes.
Do Rizal people sort of have like a dialect of Tagalog? Like, you can sort of tell somebody's like, oh, somebody's from Bulacan,
Mm-hmm.
um, somebody's from Laguna, so on and so forth. So I don't think I've actually met anybody from Rizal before.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. We have eight major languages, but we have more than 172, I think, dialects in the Philippines. And Rizal is like a province with like 10 municipalities, and then each municipality has a different dialect. I'm from Taytay, Rizal, and we have a different dialect, but it would only come out when I'm speaking to my friends who are from my hometown. But when I go to my college, which is in Metro Manila, which is like an hour away from here, not that far, I can just speak in like regular Metro Manila accent. So yeah, we do have dialect.
Interesting. So yeah, I'm wondering, what can you tell us about the Tai Tai variety of Tagalog?
Okay. We do have different phrases, such as okay, should I really explain this, or should I give some examples?
Yeah, go ahead and give us some examples.
Oh, hello. Okay. Okay. Uh, for starters, we have bang. So you're familiar with Tagalog, right? So you know ang is an intensifier in Tagalog. Like if you say ang init, that means it's so hot, or ang laki, like it's so big. But here in Taytay, we would say something like bang, and that means also ang. It's just to intensify your words. So if you say bang init or bang laki, that means it's so hot or it's so big or something like that. We also have ana, ana. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before, but that's like the tag question, like right. So here in Taytay, we would say something like, ang init na, ang init na. That means, yun, it's like ano, but here we say ana. What else? We also, I think this is not just for Taytay, but for Rizal in general. We say urong when when we want to say that we are washing the dishes, which they don't do in Metro Manila. So I think that's some of the words that we have, or dialect that we have in Taytay that others don't.
Interesting. So I did not know about the bang prefix
Yes.
for making like
Uh-huh.
the sort of like the superlative form of adjectives was a thing. Um, but again, I've not met anybody from You saw it from
Mm-mm.
Tai Tai before, so it's interesting. I was kind of
Mm-mm.
expecting it to not be as interesting as I found it, because as you mentioned, right, Tai Tai's only an hour away from Manila, so I was
Mm-mm.
thinking, okay, it's probably like got a little bit of a little bit of difference, but it's similar. But that's not the case. Seems like pretty different. I've never heard
Yeah.
uh, or ana, so
Yes.
interesting. Um, uh, do do most of your students, I guess, they just learn like the Metro Manila Filipino?
Yes, like they would like the general Filipino.
So you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned that you teach two types of people, either people who like they married into the Philippines or something, their girlfriend, their husband. And you also mentioned heritage speakers. So what are some of the differences between interacting and helping teach heritage speakers versus like adult, like brand new learners?
Oh, that's a good question actually because yeah, when I was just starting out, it was hard for me because if you're a zero level beginner, like I would know where to start, right? Like I could teach greetings or basic sentences. But if you're a heritage learner, like you're gonna get bored with all of that talk because you already know that stuff. So I found out that I would do like a diagnostic test first when we have our first lesson, and then I would know where to start. So like I have this, like technique in teaching Tagalog where I always incorporate or try to build up the foundation of my students by teaching them like what I call the three fundamental lessons in Tagalog: the markers, the verbs, and the pronouns. So if you're a heritage learner and you have a weak spot with any of those three, I'm gonna start with that, and then the next lessons would be just about, as I've said earlier, like exercises to improve speech. Like I could do exercises like what's in the box, like just answer some free talk questions and yeah, something like that. Yeah, but I have like other different types of students other than that.
So with heritage speakers,
Mhm.
what do you notice about their Tagalog whenever they try to use it?
Mm.
What are some things that you've noticed? Because actually, I've been around the block.
Mm.
I've been interacting with Filipino as a language for 7 years off and on,
Uh-huh.
and I've met a lot of brand new learners, and I've met a lot of heritage speakers. And I
Mhm.
have my own thoughts on some of the things that heritage speakers do, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. How do you feel like about their, because the two groups of students make different
Mhm.
mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
They do things differently. They're not the same at all, really. They're both learners,
Mhm.
but with heritage speakers, I've noticed they sometimes use Taglish really weird.
Yeah.
Like they may use words that are not commonly Taglished, or another thing that I've noticed with like Phil Ans is
Yeah.
if they don't know a word in Filipino, they'll try and throw in a Spanish word because we Americans tend to have pretty okay Spanish.
Yeah.
And usually, like Filipinos are like they're in California or something, so they have a lot of Spanish. So I've noticed that like a lot of Phil Ms will throw in a Spanish word, thinking that it'll be understood, and it's not understood. Um,
Mhm.
but what have you noticed? What are some differences in the abilities and the mistakes that each group makes?
Yeah. So I would say that like if you're a non-heritage learner, it's easier to correct your mistakes because it's like you're starting from scratch. But if you're a heritage learner and you make this mistake, but that mistake has been in your head for a long time, just like what you said, yeah, I've heard that. Like they would attach these random Spanish phrases because I would know like probably 80% of my students learned Spanish in high school, so it's very understandable. So what you just said, like they would use Taglish in a weird way. We have a term for that, which is konyo. So, Taglish is Tagalog and English. And then konyo is a similar term, but I'm going to tell you the difference. Taglish is used in English when the word in Tagalog is either formal, so it doesn't sound good to us, or there's no actual translation, like for appliances or newly invented gadgets. Whereas konyo is just, it's like you're both not good in English and Tagalog. I mean, like you're making grammatical errors in both language and then just incorporating these random Spanish terms. That's what konyo is. So I always tell my students, so please don't be a konyo. Please do this or please do this. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's just a funny mistake and it's very workable.
So when it comes to Tagalog, what are some of the issues that learners have? Let's hear it from a teacher, because I tend to drone on and on about Tagalog. This is like our,
Mhm.
I don't know, 50th or 60th episode of the podcast. Um,
Uh-huh.
but what, in your opinion, are some of the struggles that people have as learners?
Mm.
So it could be
Uh,
like vocabulary, it could be grammar. I imagine grammar, I'm guessing,
mhm.
but I'm not. I'm because I've seen foreigners speak Tagalog,
Yeah.
and they always kind of sound like Chinese people. You know what I mean? Like a Chinese person speaking Tagalog,
Yeah.
like ako gutom, things like that.
Yeah, no, of
Um,
course.
yeah. So, what are some of the things that you've noticed?
Yeah, I would say some of the most common mistakes. Number one would be with grammar, because even though Tagalog, lots of my students say that Tagalog grammar is pretty functional, actually, but it's still that there's so many exceptions. So you would not learn unless you have, I mean, like, you're not going to be like super fluent or bilingual if you aim for that unless you have lived here or you have spent some time here in the Philippines. So, yeah, that's one of the most common mistakes. Grammar, because there are so many exceptions, and then vocabulary, because it is, yeah, it's quite different from English. And then we also have sentence pattern, because Tagalog and English, it's just like super different. I think it's easier for non-English speakers, like people from other countries, to learn Tagalog than English speakers, because it's just so different. English uses subject, verb, object format, but Tagalog uses verb, subject, object format. So, yeah, so those are some of the most common mistakes in terms of learning. But other than that, I would just say something um, low motivation. No, I think that's all.
Yeah, I've seen I think people from like Japan and Korea tend to do pretty okay when they put their minds to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they tend to have like a similar way of
Yeah,
building
pattern.
words where they
Mm-hmm.
have like a single root, and then they build up with a lot of like suffixes or so.
Mm-hmm.
I Yeah, for sure. I think that English speakers and Chinese speakers we tend to speak like caveman Tagalog. It's not very
Yeah,
pleasant.
berok.
And I've noticed some Konyo people also kind of speak caveman Tagalog. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, we
Um,
call that barok.
yeah, they say things like "punta ko maya maya," and I'm like, that's just not doesn't sound good to me. Um, but okay, so this is a fun question.
Mhm.
What are some funny teaching stories that you might have? You've taught for 3 years, so surely something has happened that's stuck in your brain, and you're like, this is a funny story.
Well, I have few here. I think the one that stuck with me the most is when, like when I was just starting out when this happened, but I made a child cry because I taught him Tagalog grammar. So like I was teaching him like I didn't have like a separate material for kids then. Like I would just teach them just like the like what the adults would do because like, I had no idea like that you should have like a different material, like it should be a different approach because it's gonna be like more difficult for them. I thought that my lessons were like for general because I thought that my
This is
lessons
where
were
your experience with like
mm,
teaching English would have come in handy. It's like with the
yeah,
kids, you have to, like you have
mm,
to use you have to give them like stickers and
right,
things like that. You have to give them little rewards, and you have to make things into games,
mm,
and like you can teach them by like singing. So I taught English for 5 years before
uh-huh,
moving on to Refold as a company, and you know one of the first companies that I worked for, Akitsoc, hires a lot of Filipinos.
oh, uh-huh,
So there's a lot of these companies out there that hire Filipinos, and I was the same way. When I first started teaching, I talked to kids like
mm-hmm,
I was like they were adults, and I was not very fun. But
mm-hmm,
5 years later, I learned, I bought a software that like let me put like a virtual camera, so like I could like put stars on my camera and all
mm-hmm.
sorts of things, and they like that. So you try to teach a kid like an adult, and they cried.
Right. Yeah, but yeah, I did that, but like for my English company, like they had all the resources for that. And again, like when I was doing my materials in Tagalog, like I always put these colorful colors and like it's just in the most understandable way that I think. So when I taught it to the kid, I was thinking that I think this is okay for a kid as well. Like this is okay for adults as well. Like I didn't have any separate materials back then. But I was speaking in like a very soft manner and like I was never like a harsh teacher or anything. But I think the kid was just like too like uptight. So yeah, like his camera was off, and then he was silent for a while, and then I was like, "Oh, what's happening?" And then I heard him sobbing, like, "It's just so hard. I'm so sorry." I was like, "Oh, it's okay. Please don't cry. It's okay. You're doing so
And
great."
and
Yeah,
was this child were they learning because they're a heritage speaker, or were they like just like a rich
yeah,
kid, or what
yeah.
was?
Like he is a Filipino. Like he's like 10 at the time, and yeah, parents are both Filipino but never taught him Tagalog, and he lives in the States.
Yeah, that's really common. You see that a lot with you see
Mm-hmm.
they call them ingleseros,
English,
um,
yeah.
where like the sort of, I don't want to say rich, because I've actually met like old money Filipinos. They speak quite good
Uh-uh.
Tagalog. It's sort of like a middle class thing,
Yeah.
like doctors and lawyers, not people who like own a whole bunch of land or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely like a new money type thing. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's really bizarre situation, that in your own country you can't speak the national language. Uh, but I
I'm so
try not to be too critical, right? It's not his fault that he probably went to an English speaking school and his parents didn't speak
sorry.
at home, so we can't blame the kid. But we can blame the
Yeah.
parents. Um, okay. Any other fun
Yeah.
stories with teaching?
Okay. When they can't pronounce the word namimimig, don't tell my students, but I'm laughing internally every time I ask them to say that word. You have a good pronunciation. Can you try saying that? Namimimig.
Uh,
Shivering.
nanginginig.
Yeah, this is perfect. That
Yeah,
means shivering in Tagalog. And, like if you're an English speaker, I think you would know that at the beginning, NG
it's
sound is
the
very hard.
nga sound at the beginning. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
tough.
no,
Nanginginig.
yeah,
Yeah.
me. So it's very hard.
Yeah, nanginginig.
Like I would hear them say nangununu, like what? Like I never
Yeah,
laugh, but like
I
I think it's funny.
yeah, there's some things that are funny. I had a friend who was Mexican American.
Mm,
Um, and so Mexican Americans, not all of them, I would say even most of them don't do this, but there are some parts of America that actually used to be part of Mexico, like Texas, New
mm,
Mexico. Um, and sometimes these Mexican Americans, even though they've lived in America for hundreds of years, they have their own sort of accent. We call it Chicano.
mm,
Um, and even if they don't speak Spanish, it kind of sounds like a Spanish accent in English.
oh yeah.
Um, and my friend from Texas, he was Chicano, and he had a Chicano accent in English.
Mm,
And he was sort of like a heritage Spanish speaker, like he knew a few words, but it was not his language. He was
uh,
definitely English. And he cannot say ew, you know, like
you,
IW,
you. Oh, like
like
Gilio,
like
Baliw.
like sisiu or
Mm,
baliu.
yeah.
He would say like Baloo. And you know, Baloo is like the bear
Oh,
from Jungle Book, right? And it used to tickle me pink because we would be out somewhere and he would say Baloo, and I'm thinking it just I had this image of him calling him that like bear from like the Disney movie. um and yeah, a silly story, but I definitely think sometimes the foreign accented Tagalog can sound kind of funny.
yeah, the NG sounds. There are a bunch of words that we have. So I always like do that at the beginning of like the lesson when I first meet them because that's like one sound in Tagalog that I really want them to practice right at the beginning because yeah, it's just like we don't have that in the English sound, like when you put NG in the middle or at the beginning. So yeah, I know it's really hard.
Right. Yeah, like nganga, minty, things like that.
Mm, mama, yeah. Nini,
Um,
Mongolia, Mongolia.
yeah, also our vowels are very different in English, you know.
Yes.
Um, so, you know, it's sort of like everything is a diphthong. Um, you know, like if some, you know, if an American is going to say like adobo, right? And they say it
Uh-oh.
with like an American accent. I see Filipinos mock
Adobo.
our accents. They'll spell A D
I'm
A
just
B
kidding.
O W, adobo
Adobo.
with a W. Um, or like sometimes that O sound, like in manok.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
Manok.
Americans they hear it as an A sound, so
Yeah, like
you get
manok.
like manak. Yeah.
Yeah, adobo
Um,
manak.
so yes, exactly. Travis Kraft, adobo manak. Um, and it's very interesting. Also, like Filipinos have different accents, right? When they speak Filipino.
Mm-hmm.
So like to me, like a Bisaya accent is not having e and o.
Mm.
Um, so you know, struggling with those vowels because those aren't really
Yes.
sounds for them. Um, and like people from the far south of the
Mm-hmm.
Tagalog area, like people from Batangas, they tend to have a lot of diphthongs too.
Yes.
um, so yeah, it's very interesting. Now, with the heritage speakers, how many of them are actually heritage speakers of Tagalog, right? Because I'm imagining a lot of them, their parents' language is not Tagalog. So
Mm.
how many of them are like, yeah, my parents are actually Tagalog speakers?
Oh, really? Oh, do you have Filipino blood?
Oh no. I'm asking a question like
Oh,
with
okay, sorry.
with with the heritage speakers, um uh how many believe it or not, I've had that
Mm-hmm.
question before. Um I've got a lot of people who assume I'm like one fourth Filipino.
Mm.
But with the heritage speakers you teach, How many of them are
Uh,
heritage speakers of Tagalog as instead of like another language?
mhm. Yeah, not much. Like I would say probably like more less than a quarter, probably. Yeah, not a lot of them are like really heritage. Some of them are Ilocano or yeah Bisaya, but they would just try to learn Tagalog, and I think it's still easier for them than people who are zero level beginners because other languages in the Philippines are quite similar in pattern to Tagalog.
Right. Yeah, you still have the advantage of like
Mm,
speaking a closely related language.
yes.
Interesting. So looking here, give me one sec. Okay. So we've ranted a lot about Tagalog,
Mm,
but with focusing on your teaching, let's take a step back. What are some top tips that you don't see people talking about when it comes to like learning a language?
okay. So number one, yeah, I don't really see this anywhere, but please do not rely your entire language learning on your tutor. Okay, so people think that if they met or if they meet with a tutor like once or twice a week, like let's say this person lives like not in the Philippines, like for 50 minutes for each lesson, they expect to just magically be able to speak the language, right? Of course, sure. Like hiring a tutor would help you a lot, learn grammar rules, and have a speaking partner, but you still must have time to work on your flashcards, worksheet, watch content, of course, in the target language. So it's important to memorize or study by yourself, and like at least give it some time because you should study by yourself and then just you can practice it with each other. So if you learn some new words, you can try using it in sentences and then ask your tutor if that is correct or not. Second tip that I don't see others talking about is to read early. Like they would say, like just listen or watch movies or something like that. But I think it's very important that you read early, even if you don't understand anything in the language yet. Like day one, as early as day one, I think you should read in the language. So reading helps you a lot to get used to syntax. So how the words or how we put the words into sentences. And if you're a beginner and don't know what to read, this is specific to Tagalog, but you should avoid reading stuff with the article I if you don't want to sound formal. And or this is my last tip, um, I think, yeah, this is a common one, but this is not something that I would say others don't talk about. I just like to remind or try to emphasize that watching content is or would be much more helpful if you paid attention to it. So you should try to find content that is interesting to you. You should think of yourself as a baby who's just trying to pick up some words because how do we even learn our first language? We just listen, right? We just listen from adults speaking around us. So same thing with us. We live at an age where everything is available. So it's like very lucky for us to have these kind of resources. So we must take advantage of it. I think that's all.
All right, very interesting. And I definitely agree on a couple of those points, or with a couple of those points. So, in my 5 years teaching English, I occasionally had the very wealthy person. Um, I had a retired, uh, I don't know, like engineer from Germany, and he did not do any study, but he did book me an hour every day, 7 days a week as his
Wow.
tutor.
Mm-hmm.
So, I ended up firing him as a student. I ended up hiring him as a student because he was a bit of a pain in the butt to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But in the, I don't know, 9 months that I had him as a student, he did an hour
Wow.
every day, very dedicated. But I've noticed this with like some of the wealthier clients or students is they're they're used to like, okay, I want Jollibee, I can buy Jollibee. Oh, I want a car, I can just buy a car. You can't buy a language. And I've noticed that some of my wealthier
Right.
students, they'll book an hour every single day and they think they're doing the same thing. They think they're buying English, they think they're buying their target language,
Mm-hmm.
but
Exactly.
it requires more than just talking to your tutor. You actually
Yeah.
have to read, you have to put in the effort. um, and
Mm-hmm.
some people don't do that. I would totally agree. Don't rely on
Yeah.
a tutor.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. It's very helpful. Like when I was just starting, and I would teach kids, and I would be scared if what if their mom blames me if they don't learn in like 2 weeks, and then I thought, why should I blame myself for it? Like they're the one who are learning, and yeah, they should be able to be grateful for the opportunity to have a language partner or someone who would correct their mistakes. So yeah, again, don't rely or don't blame your teacher if you can't learn the language or speak the language instantly.
Sure. And definitely it's never fun dealing with parents. So, teacher Hannah, um, I noticed a while back actually that you started like a TikTok for like
Mhm.
teaching, and you've not done a whole bunch with it. You made like a
Oh,
video
right.
or two, but do you have any plans to get into like teaching content for Filipino? Because there are some influencers out there. There's like Teacher Out in
Mhm.
Manila, she's really popular. There are a couple of like these teaching influencers.
Oh. Yeah, actually, it's just that I've been busy recently because of my summer class and stuff, and I think it's interesting if I would continue that. So at first I was just experimenting, but now I think I will try to upload more about that. Thanks for
Yeah.
noticing.
Oh,
Mhm.
not a problem. I think being a content creator is quite difficult. Actually, it's glamorized, but
Right.
um, yeah, I think it's difficult. So with with all of this discussion, one more sage advice. So for people who are conversational and they're coming to you and they're like, I want to just have a conversation. What would your
Mhm.
advice be to those prospective students, the ones who can have a conversation with you in the target language? How do they
Mhm.
get the most out of it?
Okay. So my tip would be to take advantage of any opportunity to speak to a local or native. You can go to parties, you can go to get-togethers. Of course, Filipinos have lots of them. If you live places such as like California or yeah, states in general, I think if you like look hard enough, you will try or you will get parties and get-togethers, and it would really help you a lot. If you can spend some time in the country, like even a month or even just a few weeks, but then get the most out of it. Try to go out and speak with the local. Even if you're already good, I'm sure you will learn new words. And yep. And my last step is to not stop learning new words because I have students who are already like intermediate, advanced, or you know, and they will just stop learning new words. So I think it's sad because like they would just stop, and now their Tagalog would just like degrade from that. So you can have a list of a bunch of new words and challenge yourself by going through them and using them in your next conversation or even with me as a teacher. So I would just use this student of mine. He has been my student for the last 3 years. He's already good in Tagalog, but he has lessons with me for every day for like 2 years. And I would just, like type in the chat, like all of the new words that we're going to study. And then the next day or the next week, I'm just going to challenge him to use it in a sentence, like over and over. So that's how motivated he is. So yeah, I think that if you're really interested in the language, it's better that you give it a lot of time now, and you will, just get the results after some time, than just being very motivated now, and then because you're very motivated now, you're overwhelmed, and then you stop. Yeah, I think that's
Hey,
all. Mm,
yeah, I totally agree. You gotta deal with motivation, and it's more about discipline, right?
yes.
So, Teacher Hen, before we go, we've got a couple more minutes here. Is there
Mhm.
anything that I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about?
Hmm. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered anything or everything. Do you have any more questions for me?
I do have some questions,
Okay.
but they're not. I don't think they're like necessarily talking points.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think I could go on and on about. I want to learn more about Tai Tai and the
Mm-hmm.
dialect of Tagalog there, but I don't want to occupy the rest of the podcast with that. So
Uh-huh.
in terms of talking points, I think I'm pretty good. So in that case, if I think we're all talked out, before we go, what
Mm-hmm.
is your sage advice? What is your sage advice? The one piece of information, if you want somebody who's listening to take one piece of advice from you, what would it be?
Mm. Okay. My piece of advice would be to study every day. I know it sounds cliche, but it's really helpful. Okay, so never skip or never allow yourself to skip twice in a row. So if you're trying, like any habit, um, I'm not the first person to say this, but if you're very interested in learning a language, try not to lose your momentum. So it's just all gonna go to waste if you like lost everything that you have done if you lost your momentum. So try to study even 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day. That would be really helpful. So that's what I always tell my students.
And I would agree. Consistency over intensity. It's better to do
Right.
an hour a day for 3 years than do 8 hours a day for, a month or two and burn out.
Yeah.
All right. And Teacher Hannah, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's the
Thank you
middle of
so
the night for you.
much.
Did
Yeah.
great. And I look forward to having you back on, maybe next time in Filipino.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm excited about that.
All right. Bye.
Okay, bye bye. Salamat. Bye bye.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join and chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hey, as you know, there's a lot of language learning advice out there, which can make it kind of overwhelming and difficult to actually get going on your own learning. If you feel like you're struggling to figure out language learning, you're not alone. It's an extremely complicated process with tons of different steps. If you're looking for a step-by-step guide to create the perfect language learning routine for you, then you have to check out our new course. We spent thousands of hours designing a simple and straightforward process that you can use to create your own personalized language routine that actually works. We understand that every learner is different and that you have to roll with the punches and adapt. Every day for 30 days, I walk you through everything you need to know to build an effective learning routine, no matter your circumstances. We give you the advice and resources you need to ensure your success, so you don't have to waste time looking for stuff to do and can focus on learning. And if any questions do come up, don't worry. We are always there to answer any questions and clear up confusion. And it's all backed by our 90-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. If, for whatever reason, something's not quite working for you, we insist you get every penny back. It's time for you to stop wishing that you could learn a second language. It's time to become the master of your language learning journey. Check out the link below to get instant access and start your journey today.